Venturing on a treacherous odyssey from Chicago to Boston was never a feat I took lightly, especially when the destination was the Boston Marathon. Flying had never been my preferred mode of transportation, so I found myself embarking on a daunting road trip along the seemingly endless Route 20, perhaps the longest highway in the United States. Departing at 3 p.m. after a long workday, I aimed to conquer the estimated 15-hour drive, although my driving habits often trimmed an hour from such estimates. My GPS indicated an ETA of 6 a.m., a prediction I was determined to beat, even if it meant minimizing stops along the way. Route 20 unfurled before me, a desolate ribbon of asphalt cutting through open landscapes. For the most part, I had the highway to myself, with minimal traffic to contend with. Around the 10-hour mark, approximately 1 a.m., I found myself navigating near deserted roads. My ears throbbed with the sounds of blaring music as I desperately tried to stave off fatigue. My vehicle's headlights illuminated the dark expanse ahead, offering the illusion of solitude. However, as the clock struck 1 a.m., my lonely journey took an eerie turn. A set of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, catching me off guard. I was cruising in the left lane, and the vehicle behind me seemed far too close for comfort. In an attempt to escape the tailgater, I switched lanes and relinquished the left lane to them. They sped past me, only to suddenly decelerate, aligning their rear bumper with my front bumper. My heart raced as I observed the strange driver's tactics through my rearview mirror. It was as if they were playing a bizarre and dangerous game. Desperate to evade this perilous situation, I accelerated to overtake them. But as soon as I cleared their vehicle, they swerved into my lane, tailgating me dangerously close. Panic welled up inside me as I contemplated the driver's intentions. Increasing my speed only resulted in their vehicle mirroring my movements. I switched back to the left lane, and once again, they matched my speed with unnerving precision. The bizarre dance continued, and fear gripped me. An overwhelming sense of dread washed over me as I faced the reality that something was horribly amiss. This was no mere case of road rage. I couldn't fathom why anyone would torment me in this manner at such a late hour. My uninvited companion began flashing their headlights frantically, signaling me to pull over. My instincts screamed that complying was a perilous proposition, and I refused to be the victim of an unknown assailant's aggression. The highway stretched out before me, empty save for our two vehicles. I couldn't spot any other cars or the comforting glow of distant taillights. An eerie silence hung in the air, intensifying my unease. As I pondered my next move, the relentless pursuer veered into the left lane, accelerating rapidly. The deafening roar of their engine filled the night as they surged ahead. Cutting in front of me, they braked suddenly, nearly causing a collision. My heart pounded in my chest as I swerved to avoid the collision, narrowly escaping disaster. The pickup truck continued to block my path, leaving me with no option but to hit the brakes and sound my horn in protest. With my assailants' hazards flashing, they gestured for me to pull over. Panic and dread welled up within me, and I could not bring myself to obey. I seized the opportunity when they briefly pulled onto the grass and sped away, leaving the menacing pickup truck behind. My escape was harrowing, and the sense of impending danger persisted. At the next exit, I veered off the highway, hoping to find safety in the familiarity of urban surroundings. I halted at a red light, praying the nightmare was over. To my shock, the pickup truck pulled up behind me once more as the light turned red. I glanced to my left, and the driver's window rolled down to reveal a haunting sight. 3 individuals wearing vendetta masks. Their sinister appearance struck fear into my heart as their masked faces leered at me menacingly. Their intent was clear: to terrify and intimidate. I did not need further convincing. Running the red light, I rejoined the main road, finally encountering other vehicles. The pickup truck, however, did not follow, and I was left to navigate through a sea of other cars. With each passing mile, I feared I would never escape the clutches of my mysterious tormentors. I dared not glance back to note their license plate, for I could not even recall seeing one. Seeking refuge, I parked in a Walmart parking lot, trembling from the nightmarish encounter. Exhausted and shaken, I managed to catch a few hours of restless sleep before resuming my journey at daybreak. Upon reaching my destination, I recounted the harrowing tale to my family, urging them to exercise caution during late-night drives. The ordeal left me with lingering fear and paranoia, a stark reminder of the night I narrowly escaped a fate too gruesome to contemplate. I was a trucker, navigating the long hauls through several states for a small delivery company that specialized in transporting frozen goods to stores. Typically, I'd complete 3 or 4 deliveries before returning to the warehouse and then heading home. However, every now and then, we'd be faced with a lengthy delivery that required an overnight stop. On such nights, I'd usually park my truck at a truck stop, grabbing a few hours of rest before hitting the road again. But this night would be different, a night when the shadows concealed more than they revealed. I was en route to a far-off destination, well aware that I wouldn't be returning home that same day. As I drove, I drifted into my usual reverie, a trance that often enveloped me during the long, desolate stretches of road, especially late at night when the highway was bereft of fellow travelers. Time lost its meaning, and my mind wandered as the road stretched on and on. However, my reverie was abruptly shattered when I spotted an eerie glimmer in my side mirror, a glimmer that hinted at the presence of another vehicle. I shifted my attention, attempting to locate the intruder. The headlights behind me were glaring and intense, too close for comfort. I couldn't see the vehicle itself, which likely meant it was situated within my blind spot, dangerously close to the rear of my truck. An involuntary shiver ran down my spine. Hoping the tailgater would eventually switch lanes and pass me, I maintained my speed. Yet, to my bafflement, they remained glued to my rear, showing no intention of overtaking. Anxiety gnawed at me, as I knew any sudden braking on my part could result in a catastrophic collision. The clock struck 1 a.m., and I estimated that the nearest truck stop was still 40 miles away. I yearned for a respite, a chance to escape this relentless pursuer. Nevertheless, the intrusive vehicle showed no signs of relenting. Desperation began to gnaw at me. Even as I contemplated my next move, the vehicle matched my speed, ever present in my rearview mirror. I struggled to maintain my composure as the minutes passed. Suddenly, the headlights behind me flashed erratically, demanding my attention. The tailgater was growing bolder by the second, and I couldn't help but feel that danger loomed perilously close. With a heavy heart, I decided to push on, determined to reach the truck stop ahead. Finally, the comforting sign for the rest area came into view, and I steered my truck towards it. As I executed the turn, I checked my side mirror one last time, only to see the unidentified vehicle follow me into the parking lot. My unease deepened as I parked my truck. I could feel their gaze boring into me from behind, their proximity unsettling. It was time to confront the situation head-on, to address this relentless pursuit. With a sense of foreboding, I exited my truck and began to approach the enigmatic driver. In my years of trucking, I had encountered my fair share of road rage, but this encounter was unlike any other. Perhaps I had inadvertently cut them off, I reasoned, and they merely sought to vent their frustration. However, as I approached, I couldn't shake the creeping sense that something was horribly amiss. The vehicle's driver seemed uninterested in engaging with me, the silence between us unnerving. I reached the rear of my truck, ready to question the stranger. Yet, before I could utter a word, they accelerated abruptly, leaving me bewildered in their wake. The driver was an older man, his vehicle a rusted white relic reminiscent of an antiquated police car. With a feeling of dread gnawing at my soul, I watched their hasty retreat. I returned to my truck, my instincts screaming at me to be cautious. As I locked the doors and settled back into my seat, I allowed exhaustion to envelop me. My eyelids grew heavy, and I sought solace in the embrace of sleep. Time passed indistinctly, and I could hardly discern the hours that slid by. Yet, a sudden commotion snapped me awake. Glancing at my watch, I realized it had been nearly 2 hours since I had drifted into slumber. It was now past 3 a.m., and I had only an hour left to rest before resuming my journey. A deafening bang echoed from outside, and I jolted upright. My eyes darted towards the side mirror, revealing a faint, menacing silhouette shrouded in darkness. Dread crept over me as I realized someone was lurking around the back of my truck. Shivers coursed through my body as I peered beneath the trailer, spotting the unmistakable presence of a person lurking close to my vehicle. Their own car, with its headlights extinguished, was parked closely behind. Fear surged through my veins, and I knew this was far from a routine encounter. My heart raced as I imagined the intruder's intentions, perhaps theft or something even more sinister. Summoning my courage, I called out to the shadowy figure, my voice trembling with unease. Startled, they retreated hastily to their vehicle, their escape marked by the revving of their engine as they sped away into the night. I hesitated, my eyes fixed on the door that had borne the brunt of the intruder's efforts. Scratches and marks marred the lock, evidence of their sinister intent. It was clear that their goal had been to breach my trailer, but they remained unaware that it held nothing of value. After ensuring my safety and a thorough check of my surroundings, I resumed my journey. The hours passed uneventfully, but the chilling memory of that night lingered, leaving me perpetually vigilant and forever haunted by the possibility that a sinister presence might be lurking in the shadows, trailing me on my lonesome road. It was the fateful August of 2014, and I, at the tender age of 16, was preparing to take my driving test. Months earlier, I had obtained my learner's permit, commencing my behind-the-wheel lessons in earnest. These sessions involved meeting with an instructor who possessed a special car equipped with a brake on the passenger side. He would sit beside me, guiding my driving and imparting invaluable lessons. The culmination of these lessons was my final session with this instructor, scheduled for a serene evening. I recall it beginning around 6 p.m., the sun casting long shadows as it dipped below the horizon. As we embarked on our journey, the world transformed into twilight. Our route led us through various roads and practice scenarios, each honing my driving skills. Yet, as darkness descended upon us around 8 p.m., our destination remained a mystery. A park in an unfamiliar location, surrounded by a quiet, secluded neighborhood. The park itself was shrouded in obscurity, its location a mystery to me. My instructor directed me to park the car and proceeded to set up a series of small orange cones outlining the parameters of a parking space. A practical parking exercise was on the agenda, it seemed. We were situated at one end of the parking lot, a compact but desolate area with ample space for our practice. The streets bordering it were devoid of life, and silence reigned supreme. As I began honing my parking skills, I spotted a car entering the parking lot, emerging from the opposite end. At first, I thought little of it, dismissing it as another motorist seeking a quiet spot on this dimly lit evening. The vehicle parked at a considerable distance from us, nestled in its own corner of the lot. My instructor and I continued our practice, unperturbed by the arrival of the other car. However, soon thereafter, another vehicle approached, joining the parking lot closer to our position. This newcomer navigated partway towards us before parking. Curiosity piqued, my instructor couldn't help but comment on this unusual development. We had ventured here with the assumption of solitude, expecting an empty parking lot to facilitate our training. It was an oddity for vehicles to converge in this desolate spot under the cloak of night. Unperturbed, I diligently focused on my parking exercises, determined to master this critical skill. As time passed, I continued my practice, successfully avoiding the cones set up by my instructor. However, an air of unease began to permeate the car as the two parked vehicles remained still, their occupants concealed within. My instructor expressed mild bewilderment at their presence, and we speculated about their intentions. Then, in an abrupt turn of events, one of the parked cars reversed from its space. The parking lot boasted two exits, each situated at opposite ends. Initially, it seemed as though this car would simply depart. Instead, it circled behind us, blocking our path, mere feet from our rear bumper. I was gripped by uncertainty as to how to proceed, and my instructor mirrored my confusion. This action was entirely unprovoked, as we weren't obstructing their path, and they could easily have bypassed us. In response, my instructor decided to investigate the situation, exiting the vehicle with a sense of trepidation. I waited patiently inside, my eyes glued to the windshield, the darkness outside concealing the ensuing events. Time trickled by, the minutes stretching into an eerie silence. It felt much longer than it likely was. Suddenly, my instructor re-entered the vehicle with unexpected swiftness, his countenance etched with fear. He instructed me to leave the parking lot immediately, his voice quaking. I obliged, leaving the parking lot with haste, and to my bewilderment, the car that had been blocking our path followed suit. My instructor urged me to remain calm, though I sensed the anxiety that coursed through him. Once we had safely exited the parking lot, the two vehicles continued to tail us, maintaining their relentless pursuit. The situation escalated and dread pervaded our vehicle as I navigated the unfamiliar roads under the guidance of my anxious instructor. With his assistance, we eventually arrived at a police station. The pursuing vehicles lingered momentarily, but eventually departed, leaving us shaken and profoundly relieved. We promptly reported the harrowing encounter to the authorities, and my parents were called to collect me. Although I eventually passed my driving test, the memories of that unsettling night continued to haunt me. The bizarre ordeal served as a stark reminder of the unpredictability of the road and the darkness that can lurk behind the wheel of a seemingly ordinary car. For over 15 years, I had been a taxi driver navigating the bustling streets of Chicago, but my journey had started far away in Las Vegas. This tale unfolds years before the era of Uber and similar ride-sharing platforms, when the traditional yellow taxi reigned supreme. However, my story harks back to a time when my taxi service was anything but conventional. In those days, I worked for a more modern taxi outfit. We employed our own vehicles, placing a taxi sign on the roof whenever we were on duty. The company would take a cut of our earnings, but in return, we enjoyed the freedom to work whenever and wherever we pleased, charging fares as we saw fit. It was a luxurious arrangement, offering an illusion of permanence I was loath to relinquish. My work schedule, or lack thereof, was dictated by my whims. I would hit the streets whenever I felt like it, without the constraints of a preset agenda. As for holidays, they held little significance for me, as I had no family nearby and lived a solitary existence. Christmas Eve, in particular, was just another day in the life of a lone taxi driver. On that fateful Christmas Eve, I began my shift at 10 a.m., heartened by the brisk business that had characterized my day thus far. There was hardly a moment of respite between customers, and the festive season had loosened people's purse strings, translating to higher fares. At its zenith, I was raking in nearly $80 an hour, an income that exceeded my expectations. By 8 p.m., I had already logged 10 hours on the job, yet the steady stream of passengers showed no signs of abating. However, as the evening progressed, the first snowflakes descended from the heavens, a harbinger of a wintry onslaught. Though the snowfall was still relatively gentle, I knew the situation could deteriorate rapidly. Hunger pangs eventually drove me to a fast food joint, but I was determined to seize every opportunity to ply my trade as long as I could. The Yuletide revelry had begun to wane, and other taxi drivers had opted to head home, reducing the competition for fares. I picked up a small group of passengers and dropped them off in a modest neighborhood characterized by close-knit, aging residences. Despite the unassuming locale, my passengers were gracious and left a generous tip. As I departed their destination and merged back into the night, a shadowy figure emerged from the abyss, brandishing a beckoning hand from behind a parked car. The snowfall made it difficult to discern his features, but his demeanor seemed strangely apprehensive. This was not an uncommon occurrence in such neighborhoods, where passengers often appeared unexpectedly. I pulled up alongside the enigmatic figure, who, sporting a dark hoodie, had an air of discomfort about him. Oblivious to the impending dread, I motioned for him to enter. "Where to?" I inquired, my eyes scanning the rearview mirror. Silence hung in the air, and I repeated my query, my voice more insistent. However, he remained reticent, his gaze momentarily meeting mine before shifting away. Eventually, he uttered a barely audible request to be dropped off at an unfamiliar address scribbled on a scrap of paper. As I turned my attention to the paper, the atmosphere in the car grew palpably tense. Despite my extensive experience driving the city's streets, the address appeared alien to me. My knowledge of Chicago's roadways was comprehensive, yet this location had never registered on my mental map. Alarmed but determined to assist, I input the address into my seldom-used GPS, only to be met with a disheartening message: "No matches found." "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't recognize this address. It doesn't seem to exist," I ventured, my anxiety mounting. Nonetheless, my passenger seemed undeterred by my inability to locate the address. "Just pull over here," he commanded abruptly, producing the scrap of paper once more. I obliged, pulling the car to a stop along a desolate, snow-covered street. The neighborhood appeared to be utterly deserted, with not a soul in sight and an eerie stillness enveloping us. I shifted the gear into park and awaited further instructions, a sense of unease growing within me. My passenger continued to gaze out of the side window, his demeanor increasingly agitated. Then, with an abrupt movement, he lunged forward, invading the space between the front seats and thrusting a small, menacing firearm against my skull. Panic surged through me as he began to shout, demanding my wallet, keys, and valuables. The excruciating pain radiating from the barrel of the gun pressed against my head paralyzed me. I struggled to comply, frantically searching for my wallet, but moving too slowly to satisfy his impatient demands. In a fit of fury, he pistol-whipped me savagely, the blinding pain reverberating through my skull like a thunderclap. My vision blurred, my senses reeling, and consciousness began slipping away. Dazed and reeling, I awoke on the desolate roadside, the aftermath of the ordeal etched into my memory like a macabre tapestry. Snow blanketed my shivering form, and the bitter cold gnawed at my core. My taxi, along with my wallet, keys, and phone, had vanished without a trace. My throbbing head served as a painful reminder of the assault as I struggled to stand and find my bearings. With great effort, I navigated through the snow-covered sidewalks to a nearby gas station where I finally found assistance. My car would eventually be recovered a week later, abandoned at a remote location beyond the city limits. While I emerged from the harrowing incident physically intact, the ordeal left indelible scars. The subsequent struggle to replace my stolen possessions was an arduous journey. I was ultimately compelled to seek employment with a larger taxi company run by the city, which provided a modicum of safety and security. However, my encounter with that enigmatic passenger had cast a lingering shadow over my psyche. The memory of his senseless violence and aggression haunted my every shift. The terror of that Christmas Eve would forever serve as a stark reminder that darkness knows no holidays, and evil can lurk even amidst the season's festivities. I was 29 years old, on a dark winter evening, driving a relatively short distance with my 5-year-old daughter. Our destination was my in-laws' house outside the city, a routine journey we had undertaken countless times before. My husband and I had agreed that my daughter and I would leave first, with him following a couple of hours later due to his late work hours. The winter sun had already set by 4:30 p.m., plunging the world into a frigid darkness. As a mother, my primary concern was our safety, even though I tried to convince myself that everything would go smoothly. The desolate, unlit back road we were on didn't exactly instill confidence, but I had brushed off my uneasy and focused on reaching our destination. We were about an hour and a half from my in-laws' home when I spotted flashing yellow lights in the distance, piercing through the darkness. The hazard lights of a vehicle in the middle of the road caught my attention, sending a shiver down my spine. Instead of pulling over to the side, the car was inexplicably stationed right in the middle of the road. A growing sense of unease gnawed at me. As a mother, I couldn't ignore the alarm bells ringing in my head. I brought the car to a halt approximately 80 to 100 feet from the stationary vehicle, contemplating my next move. The ominous feeling persisted. It was clear that I couldn't stop to help these people. I was a woman in my late 20s, traveling with my young daughter, and I knew the risks of stopping for strangers. My decision was clear: prioritize our safety above all else. I would call for assistance once we were safely away from this unsettling situation. After what felt like an eternity of indecision, I resolved to turn around and head back home, waiting for my husband to accompany us. The downside was that I was on a 2-lane road, and executing a 3-point turn to head back required time I didn't have. But just as I began to hesitate, my rear-view mirror reflected the approach of shadowy figures, rapidly closing the gap between us. Moonlight revealed them as human silhouettes, but their intentions remained shrouded in mystery. With an adrenaline-fueled urgency, I shifted the car into drive and accelerated. I couldn't remain immobilized any longer. The approaching figures, silhouetted against the night, solidified into a terrifying reality. People, and they were carrying something. My body reacted before my mind, slamming the gas pedal to the floor. My vehicle surged forward, barreling toward the immobile car. There was no alternative but to drive onto the side of the road to bypass it. As I passed the stationary vehicle, more figures emerged from the darkness, flinging objects at my car, desperate to halt my escape. I sideswiped one of them, and they tumbled to the pavement. Something struck my windshield, causing it to crack, and a foreign object landed in the passenger seat. I screamed, involuntarily echoing my daughter's terrified cries. I reassured her that everything would be okay, though I was acutely aware of the futility of my words. She was only 5, and nothing could erase the trauma of this night. My sole focus was to keep driving, to put as much distance as possible between us and those menacing figures. I maintained my foot on the accelerator, refusing to relent despite the chaos that had erupted behind us. My mind raced with thoughts of safety and security, driven by an instinct to protect my child at any cost. Our eventual arrival at my in-laws' residence brought momentary respite from the ordeal. Their house was equipped with a secure gated entrance, guarded by my father-in-law. He met us at the driveway, clutching a firearm, and immediately recognized the distress etched on our faces. My tears flowed freely as I recounted the nightmarish encounter to my in-laws. My father-in-law, protective by nature, radiated anger. He inquired if we were followed, but my attention had been wholly occupied with the cars behind us, with no consideration for pursuers. My in-laws took our safety seriously, fortifying their home with a plethora of firearms and surveillance cameras. Security was paramount for them, both inside and outside the property. Monitoring the security cameras revealed the persistence of our pursuers. The car that had been trailing us continually approached the front gate, executed U-turns, and retraced its path multiple times. It was a chilling reminder that our ordeal was far from over. Desperate to ensure our safety, my father-in-law contacted the police, hoping for immediate assistance. To our dismay, the authorities informed him that they couldn't intervene, citing jurisdictional constraints beyond their city limits. Their assistance could only be enlisted in life-threatening situations, and this situation did not meet the criteria. Frustration and anxiety swelled within us as we grappled with the inability to rely on local law enforcement. My father-in-law conveyed a clear message to the police dispatcher. Any intruders on our property would be met with lethal force, a testament to his commitment to protecting his family. As we awaited developments, our focus remained on the security cameras, scrutinizing every movement outside. In a moment of grim realization, we observed 2 individuals disembark from the car and approach the front gate, unaware of my father-in-law's presence. Their attempts to force the gate open were captured on the surveillance feed, their actions growing more frantic as they pushed against the barrier. The impending confrontation was fraught with tension, although we couldn't discern the heated exchange of words taking place outside. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out, punctuating the silence of the night. My father-in-law, armed and resolute, had fired a warning shot into the air. His shouted commands were inaudible to us, but it was evident that the intruders had been forcefully deterred. Panicked, the trespassers retreated to their car and sped away, vanishing into the night. Relief washed over us, though the unsettling memories of that night would forever haunt our thoughts. My husband arrived at my in-laws' house an hour later, guilt-ridden and apologetic for not having been with us during our ordeal. I reassured him that the outcome would likely have been the same, regardless of his presence. What mattered most was that we were safe. In the days that followed, we learned of a series of carjackings in the area, though fortunately, no one had sustained serious injuries. Reflecting on that chilling night, I couldn't help but shudder at the thought of what might have befallen us had I not spotted those menacing figures in the rearview mirror. I remain eternally grateful for our safety and adhere to a principle of never traveling alone at night without protection, whether it be my husband or a firearm. It was the late summer of 2011, a time when the veil between our world and the dark unknown thinned. I was on the cusp of turning 19, my best friend a few years younger, and we resided in the desolate heart of southwestern Virginia, mere minutes from the eerie shadow of Mount Airy, North Carolina. Our isolated existence meant that everything shuttered by 10 p.m., forcing us to forge our own nocturnal diversions. But that was never a concern, for we were masters at crafting our own brand of sinister entertainment. The night began innocuously, typical of teenage boys seeking excitement. First, we ventured to the mall, hoping to find some girls, but our efforts yielded naught but disappointment. Defeated, we opted for a game of bowling until the clock struck closing time. Restless, we migrated to Main Street just before the witching hour, delving into the labyrinthine back alleys. We assumed the roles of edgy rebels, swaggering through the darkness with reckless abandon. Despite the empty streets and the rarity of violence in our region, an inexplicable unease began to settle in our bones. As we meandered through those gloomy byways, we suddenly spotted a flickering light in our periphery. Our eyes reluctantly gravitated toward it, and what we saw sent shivers through our spines. There, standing beneath the ghostly glow of a porch light, was a man. His features remained cloaked in shadow, but his unwavering gaze followed our every step. A sense of foreboding crept over us, though we attempted to dismiss it as paranoia. We chalked it up to a smoker seeking a solitary moment outside. It wasn't his presence, but the peculiar stillness, the way he watched us, that sent an eerie chill down our spines. But that was merely the beginning. We increased our pace, our hearts pounding as we continued our journey down an unfamiliar road, one I had traversed only once before in the daylight. This uncharted path began in North Carolina, but soon led us back into the desolate woods of Virginia. Like most forsaken dirt roads in the region, it received scant attention from the county. The few scattered houses lay hidden in the shadows, often overlooked in the inky blackness of night. We might have overlooked them as well, were it not for a dim light beckoning us from one of the houses. We both glanced toward it, and there, beneath that spectral glow, stood a man. We strained to discern any defining features, but all we could discern was his unnerving stillness and the haunting way his head tracked our movements. Unease festered within us, but we tried to push it aside, attributing it to an overactive imagination. We had no idea that this was just the beginning of our descent into terror. As we reluctantly accelerated, dread coursed through us. We felt vulnerable and exposed, as if the very night itself had become our enemy. We began discussing the bizarre encounter, our unease growing with every whispered word. In a matter of minutes, we reached the end of that forsaken road and returned to familiar ground, a paved road that I navigated routinely. We breathed a sigh of relief as I turned right, leaving the unsettling presence behind. The comfortable familiarity of the road offered solace, and we allowed ourselves to relax, leaving the memory of the enigmatic watcher in our wake. Our journey continued along a winding road that stretched along a narrow mountain ridge, granting us breathtaking views of the town below. We marveled at the sight, temporarily freed from our fears. But then, just a few miles later, we glimpsed something sinister ahead, illuminated by the distant beams of my headlights. Deer sightings were common here, their ghostly forms haunting the roads at night. We slowed, assuming that's what it was. Yet, as we drew nearer, it became evident that this was no deer. It was a hunched figure, human, but grotesquely distorted. The person walked along the left lane, facing oncoming traffic as if obeying some dark command. My friend's voice trembled as he asked, "What the hell is she doing out here at this hour?" As we closed the distance, the figure finally turned to face us, revealing a nightmare in the making. Her face was a grotesque canvas, deep-set eyes with dark bags, greasy hair, and skin that bore the weight of ages. She resembled a specter from the depths of a drug-induced nightmare, though her true age was impossible to discern. But it was the sight of her hands that sent our hearts racing. She thrust them into the air, waving frantically as she charged toward us. A horrifying tableau unfolded as we noticed what clutched in one hand, a knife gleaming ominously. Blood, dried and dark, stained her clothes. Our pretensions of youthful bravado vanished in an instant, replaced by sheer terror. We slammed the accelerator, our tires screeching in a desperate bid for escape. The woman's blood-curdling visage and her relentless pursuit seared into our minds as we sped toward the safety of the highway. The 5-minute drive home became a harrowing 35-minute odyssey, fueled by the irrational fear that she could somehow follow us. In a tight-knit community like ours, where everyone knew everyone, the appearance of this blood-soaked apparition was unfathomable. Neither my friend nor I ever encountered her again. We scoured the local news, searching for reports of a woman drenched in gore wielding a knife, but found nothing. Years passed, and I now reside with my wife along that tranquil mountain road, nestled between the two roads of our dreadful encounters. We traverse the latter road daily, yet the mysterious woman remains an enigma, her presence an unsettling specter in our memories. Recently, a drug and cockfighting ring was uncovered in the vicinity, not far from the house where the watching man had stood. I cannot say whether it was the same house, or if these malevolent forces existed in our midst back then. But I cannot help but wonder if the man we saw was guarding that sinister abode. As for the woman, I pray that our paths never cross again, for in those woods, beneath the shroud of night, some horrors are best left undisturbed, lurking in the shadows of our shared past.